Hello, friends, and welcome to Real Life Conversations for Christian Coaches. I'm Teresa McCloy.
And I'm Erica Vinson. We are so grateful you're listening in. Here on the podcast each week, we want to have real conversations to help you grow a successful, sustainable coaching business and yet still stay grounded in what truly matters.
We're here to share practical tools, honest stories, and our own experiences as coaches, as well as inviting some great guests on the show to support you as a coach and to live from a place of rest, not rush.
Whether you're just getting started or have been coaching for years, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's conversation.
Well, here we are in the second episode, but yet not really, because we've been doing this for 337 episodes, but this is the second episode in a new place that we are with the podcast. So I'm super excited, Erica, to welcome you back. I did a solo last week to introduce the concept of switching up the podcast. This is the fourth iteration of the podcast, and it really shows how the journey happens as a business owner, which you may be able to relate to if you're listening in, even as a coach who's had a business for a while. You start out doing one thing, and I think I'm going to coach in this niche, and then you switch a little bit and try something else on. And so I'm excited for you and I, both as coaches that have been working in this industry for a while, to really gain more clarity and dive in. So welcome to the new version of the podcast, Erica.
It's great to be back, and every great coaching conversation has a clear agreement. So we just want to be clear about the message that we're sharing. And sometimes it's best to just let your niche find you. And it certainly has, as we've noticed what's life-giving, and we love working with coaches.
I love that. This is the agreement part. So we're making an agreement with you as our listener that this will be the audience that we're speaking to. Now, that being said, if you find this podcast and you're listening in and you're like, I don't know that I'm really a coach, but I show up in my workplace with a coach approach, or I love learning more about it, you're still in the right place. We're going to have a lot of great practical tools and business application and things. But as we just continue to think about this podcast and our passion, and especially for me, I've just had a lot of clarity. You can listen to last week's podcast around what brings me the most joy. And I will say also just watching you, Erica, develop as a coach, develop as an instructor at a coaching school, and all the things that I know you're talented and gifted at. I've just seen this light really shine in you. And I'm like, hey, we need to just really niche down into who are we talking to? So yes, the agreement is clear at this point.
Yes. Thank you, friend. And it's so true of our stories. I was an elementary teacher prior to coaching and family ministry, all those things. And it's like God just continues to bring those things forward.
Yeah. If you don't know a little bit, and you may not be familiar with Erica and I's backstory, but we do know each other well. We have worked together, as she just mentioned. She was in family ministry for several years, and we actually were on church staff together. We have done this journey of coaching together and have crossed paths there, as well as being very, very good friends who lived in the same community for years. So we've done a lot of life story together, as well as working together in work that we do. So you may hear that come up now and then as we share here. I feel like this is like a new, fresh start in so many ways. It's going to be fun. What we thought that we might dive into today to go along with this new title of the podcast of Real Life Conversations, let's just share a little bit of our backstories of how we got to coaching. And before I even ask you, Erica, to share a little bit of that for you, I want to invite you, if you're listening in, I love finding out how people got to coaching. And Erica and I both love having those kinds of conversations. Like, what got you here? I just think it's so interesting how somebody gets to coaching. One of the ways you can connect with us is actually on a free platform. The Real Life Circle community is a free platform that we have. Just go to the reallifeprocess.com and then click up at the top on community and come in and either private message Eric and I, or post it right there in the community hub chat of how you got into coaching or why you're looking at getting into coaching. And we'd love to know. We'd love to hear more. That's one way you can connect with us. Erica, let's dive in a little bit to your story first. What were some things that got you to here of actually being a certified coach?
Well, as I said, moving from teaching into ministry, I had walked through a divorce in the middle of full-time ministry. So I did a lot of counseling. It was super helpful for me with that past hurt and some of the very present things. And then I was ready to move forward. And as I was ready to move forward, God kind of incrementally introduced me into some healing groups and then the Transforming Center, which was a larger co-ed group that you and I were both a part of with Ruth Haley Barton. And through that, I was introduced to Nancy Beach, and she had a women in leadership coaching circle. So I'd known of Nancy in the ministry world, and then it was kind of further stretched even as I started to look at transforming community. And it was my first step back in. And so it was a group coaching experience in 2014. And I loved it. It stretched me in ways that I had not had momentum to move forward in quite a long time. And then honestly, you invited me in 2016 when your journey began with the coaching school that we both served with. Shout out to Professional Christian Coaching Institute. But you were looking for a client and just said, hey, would you be up for be a client for me? And I said, yes. And so that was my first one-to-one experience. And then when I was reaching, not sure what's happening yet, but I knew I was ready for something new in ministry. It was in 2018 that I took my first class with Professional Christian Coaching Institute, just called The Essentials of Life Coaching to Discern. Is this something that I love? And it challenged me. It was something I couldn't plan. It was something I couldn't figure out. And I was hooked. I just loved the trust and dependency that it created for me on the Holy Spirit and just being that exciting place with clients. And so, yeah, continued to grow and develop since then to get my professional life coaching and leadership coaching certificate, and then my credential, the associate certified coaching credential with the ICF.
Yeah. And she's also one of our certified coaches here at the Real Life Process. In fact, she holds the distinction of Master Certified Coach. She was our very first coach and has been instrumental in the development of a lot of the content that we have, the framework that we have, that we certify coaches in. We'll talk about that in just a little bit, because that's been a part of both of our journeys too, is to not only become coaches ourselves, but then to help and develop other coaches in framework coaching, which is a way of coaching, one of the methods or ways that you can use. And so we'll talk about that in just a little bit. Yeah, it's been so cool. Every time I hear you kind of tell the story, I remember like, oh yeah, I remember when we were there. I remember asking you as a dear friend to like, will you please be a client for me? And just kind of leaning into that place. I literally remember where I was standing, what room I was in. There are those moments, and you may have that as you're listening into, where you just remember certain things and say, wow, that was a moment. That was a life-changing space. The challenge that I had is I also trained with Professional Christian Coaching Institute, and it was like, go get some clients. So one thing that if you're looking for a growth step, we're just going to always challenge you with these growing steps that we have as we develop our business. And one might be, maybe this week is the week that you say, I'm going to ask a couple people if they'll be my client, or I'm going to ask someone that's at another level. So you may have had a coaching business for a while and you're like, I've always wondered if this person would be open to having a conversation about coaching. Do you remember who your first client was? But do you remember that experience of asking and putting yourself out there?
Yes, it's so vulnerable. And yet I remember that orientation for that very first class. And it was like, what grows in the gap between knowledge and actual practice is insecurity. So what we have to start doing is, to be a better coach, we have to start coaching, which is terrifying and exciting at the same time.
There are lots of different ways to gain that coaching experience. And we'll talk about that as we get further along in the podcast and develop out some of these and talk about practical tools. Is how do you develop that experience? For my own journey, similar in some ways to Erica's, in that I left the ministry space about a year. Erica and I were on staff together, as we said, and I left about a year and a half before she did from that space to come home and be with my family, and just felt a calling in that season of life with some difficult things that were happening in my story as well. And I write about that in the book and that I wrote in 2022, Do What Matters. And so you can read that whole backstory there. But the truth being, I knew though that I still wanted to be with people in some way. Didn't know what that was going to look like. And I actually had a client that I was working with as a virtual assistant. That was kind of the in-between job that I did in that season. And he said, you're not a virtual assistant, right? You're a coach. And I'm like, that's a word that I haven't thought about. I was actually going back to school, thought I would go to school for counseling, finish up my degree, those kind of things. And then when he said that, I remember going back a few years before, and I'd actually hired a coach for our son, Eric, who was struggling with ADHD. And he was probably 15 or 16 at the time. And I'm like, maybe if someone else can speak into his life and give him some guidance, some coaching, that this high school journey and transition into adulthood might be easier for him. So that was my first experience watching someone coach. I remember driving to St. Louis, Missouri, and taking him to meet with her one-on-one. We had to go buy a camera so that he could see her online and all those things. So that was kind of my first experience. So that triggered in me, okay, there is a way that people do this with others. And the short story, long story is I Googled Christian coaching. And maybe you're listening today and you're like, I Googled Christian coaching and that's how I found this podcast, because that's what happened to me. I Googled Christian coaching and found Professional Christian Coaching Today, which is a podcast that's long running by two good friends of ours, Chris McCluskey and Kim Avery. And they have co-hosted that podcast for years, one of the longest running podcasts around Christian coaching. So we're honored to be in the same space with them. And I listened to every single episode while I was driving a tractor that spring for my husband. And like you said, I was hooked. I was like, what is this all about? This sounds amazing. And I signed up for classes within a week and didn't even know what I was getting into, didn't know what they were, but I was in and I was hooked. And that was in 2016. And within a few months, I was asking Erica to be a client because, that's what I needed first, was clients. So we've both taken a journey through coaching schools, through ICF, International Coach Federation training, to get to the knowledge, I think is the way I would say it, of coaching. But coaching is not just knowledge, it's also skills and practice. What do you think has been some of the transformational part of just the practice, the doing it scared, so to speak, getting out there? How do you think that's impacted the work you do as a coach?
I think that the core competencies that the International Coaching Federation, they really are like fundamentals. I was always an athlete, and it's like, to learn the fundamentals, to have that foundation is helpful, to know that there are some guardrails to this, but it was something I really had to experience. And I think what helped me the most initially was being a client. So if you're curious about being a coach, I would say hire a coach. And so sit in the seat of being a client, because when I even described being hooked earlier, as you were talking, Teresa, I'm just recalling thinking that like hooked for me was I had not experienced momentum like that in really taking action. I'm a processor. I like to discern things, sometimes too long, because I wanted to do things well and responsibly. but it helped me to take action and to take risks that were measurable and helpful with accountability. And so being a client helped me to be and helps me to be a better coach.
That's so good. And I really had the same experience. And I remember I had an academic advisor, and I met with them as I signed up and came into the program and started taking classes. And I ended up hiring my academic advisor as my very first coach, because I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I probably should experience what it's like. So again, if you're listening in, maybe a growth step is, I want to coach. I think this would be a great business for me to build, a great ministry for me to put out, a great way to use my gifts, but maybe I want to experience this first. Here's what's interesting, and this is where you and I are different in our personalities, right? Whereas action for you was like helping you move forward. For me, as a very action oriented person that can jump off the ledge too quickly, having a coach helped me to frame it in such a way of what's sustainable, what pitfalls might I be able to talk through of this might not work or this would work. And I'm a verbal processor. So to process it out loud with someone helped me to actually slow down and do my discernment kind of in the moment and walk away and not maybe make the mistakes that I might have made had I not had a coach to walk with me in that process. So I think no matter what your personality is, a coach can be helpful in both ways. I will challenge those of you who are already coaches. Don't think you've grown past needing a coach. Erica and I both still have a coach, and we've been coaching for a long time. We provide coaching to those coaches in our community. And one of the reasons we do is because we believe that good coaches need a coach. So we wanted to build that into our certification process and our ongoing network community.
I would say too, the higher level you get in leadership or in skill, if you're in athletics, whatever it is, you need the coach all the more because it's so lonely at the top. And another space really that helped to develop some confidence that we have built into our program as well is peer coaching. And so in the teaching world, I think of it as student teaching. And I was so fortunate in my training in my undergraduate program that they actually put me in the classroom as an educator, like second semester freshman year. So I knew I was in the classroom in a vulnerable spot with the kids, with the teachers. And it was great because I knew I loved it. So getting in those peer coaching opportunities too, when you're training, which great coaching schools have that built into programs for you to actually coach in the moment, it feels very vulnerable. Our coaches do it even that 5th week of the month. We do that laser focused in our network and everybody turns off their cameras. You listen in. And it is like this sacred ground that you don't often get to witness because of the confidentiality, but to hear it and then be able to process it, there's something really powerful about even peer coaching and working together.
I am in a speaker training program right now. And one of the things that we do in that program is rehearsal. So it's just a different language, but it's the same thing. We have to rehearse portions of our speech, portions of things, and see what resonates, what works. We get feedback from those in the room. That there's so much value in that rehearsal. So whether it's peer coaching and coaching, whether it's the skills that you do as an athlete, all of those things, if you think about it, and we often laugh about this when we use the word coach, right? I've heard Kim Avery, one of our friends, say this, I used to tell people I was a coach and they go, oh, really? What sport? Because we're used to that term in coaching for athletics. But if it's good for athletics, using that same term is I need someone in my life to walk with me, which kind of leads us to a place I wanted to go. There is that word coach, a life coach, a leadership coach, an executive coach, a business coach. We put a lot of words in front of the word coach. And yet there's nothing in the industry that says you have to have any training whatsoever. You could just say, I have a lot of life experience and I don't want to throw any industry under the bus. So I'm going to call myself a health coach and I'm going to hang out a shingle and be a health coach. And I have friends who are health coaches and they are very certified, qualified, credentialed. But no matter what the industry, you can say, I'm a coach. There are people that probably have enough life experience and enough self-awareness to maybe be able to do that. But you and I both believe that there's some value in having some training in some way, shape, or form. One of the ways that we've done that is through a coaching school that uses the International Coach Federation core competencies.
Well, the International Coaching Federation is really the gold standard. It's a leading global organization for coaching, and it really is just dedicated to advancing the profession and having high standards. And so you mentioned the core competencies, which any credentialed coach or coach that's just seeking further knowledge, further growth, look toward and read and see. What does this look like in a relationship with a client? It has 8 specific core competencies. And so we actually talk a lot about those in our network with our coaches, even though we are not an International Coaching Federation. We are accredited to do continuing education hours because of the program and because we tie those and the work that we do in training to the core comps.
If you want to know more about that, you can just go back a few episodes in our podcast when we were called the Doing What Matters podcast. We just did an episode on receiving that continuing education. So if you already have an ICF credential and you're looking at things, you can reach out and find out more information about how we give continuing education hours through our certification. The ICF is really that gold standard, as you said, and you could be in any industry. You could be a health coach, you could be a business coach, you could be an executive coach. Put any title you want, and you can put it under the ICF credentialing model. What we did in 2020 was I had created a framework that I used with my clients. Like, here's a pathway that I take my clients through as I coach with them. And it has some components to it and some particular ways that we step through a rule of life process and develop some content and things around that. So in 2020, we actually created a certification for people that wanted to use that framework in the coaching they were doing. And we call our coaches certified coaches in the real life process. So it's looking at a framework. They have the rights from an intellectual property to use that content and those types of things. You see that a lot in the coaching industry. So you'll hear people that say, I'm certified in Clifton Strengths, or I'm certified in the Colby, or I'm certified in the Enneagram, or I'm certified in this. I was just talking with a client today that said, it seems like some coaches just collect certifications. And yes, it does seem like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just a way of staying educated and up to date on different things. And that's what we have with the real life process. It is a way to educate you and train you and teach you in our tools and give you a coach certification around our tools. We stick pretty close to the ICF core comps and really like that model as a foundation. But as you're out there and you're in this coaching space or you're looking at coaching, don't be afraid to gather some certifications, I would say, but don't feel like I just need to chase after certifications constantly to feel like I'm enough. I would say what you and I talked about earlier is just go coach. Go get the skills, go be with clients, go practice with peers. Experience counts for so much in this industry.
It absolutely does. I was meeting with one of our coaches today, and they were talking about, I'm experienced, but I don't feel like I'm seasoned. And we just talked about, what does that actually make possible for you to name that you're experienced, but maybe that you're not an expert or feel like you're completely seasoned and have this all figured out. And it was a real aha moment to go, wow, actually, I may be coming at this pretty open, and I may be more focused on my client because I'm not approaching it as I'm the expert in the problem. And we just talked about, coaching the person instead of the problem. It's a real perspective shift when we're able to be open and be trusting in that. There's a dependency, and especially for a Christian coach, when you're leaning into the Holy Spirit and the Holy Spirit's leading as you coach, but there's a lot of trust that our clients are really the expert in their lives. It's not us. We just get to partner with them.
For sure. I think that's what makes it fun, is we don't have to hold the responsibility of the outcome. Well, I'm excited about where we're going to go with these conversations, and we plan on just continuing to dive deeper to help you as a coach or someone who's exploring maintaining your coaching practice. One of the things I believe in the most, is one of the reasons I created the framework I did, is to live the life that we have sustainably and integrated, to be able to live even as a coach from a place of, I don't have to hustle. This doesn't have to be hard. This is gifts that God has given me, and I want to lean into them. I want to do it with some rhythms in my life. The one thing that I know as a business owner, if you're developing a business, is that it can take over your whole entire life if you're not careful. And all of a sudden, all that time freedom and flexibility that you thought you had is out the window. That's not how we believe here, that you want to build a business, or that we want to help you build a business that looks like that. But this is passion that I think Eric and I both feel pretty strongly, and we've seen it develop in other coaches in the field. And so we're excited to be on this journey with you. Remember, you can come join our free community. We have lots of free resources and downloads available on our website. Just click on the resources tab. You can get some of our resources there to see our coaching framework, and also some of the ICF compared to our certification, and just lots of free tools, needs and values assessments, different things that we'll talk about as well. Erica, thanks for taking the ride with me always and being on the journey.
It's going to be a fun adventure.
Yeah, it's going to be fun for sure. Erica has recently started even teaching at PCCI. And so bringing her skill set in, even as an instructor, and how she's constantly looking at it through that lens of instructing others, I think will just pay benefits here on the podcast. So we will be back next week, and just encourage you to take some growth steps. That's one thing I want to leave us with every week. Last week, I challenged you to subscribe to the podcast and join our free community. Just get plugged in. Those were the growth steps. So we'll challenge you again as well. Go check out some of our resources. If this is newer to maybe making that ask of, we're making a list of clients, like who would I want to serve? Who would be the next person that I want to reach out and have a conversation with? So we'll just leave you with that for growth steps. And I have closed the podcast the same way since 2019. Even though this is a new name, I don't think I'm ready to change how we close it out, because I think it's a great challenge. It's how I want to live my life and bring you along in the journey as well. That remember that every ordinary day has an extraordinary moment. You just have to look for them. So look for those moments as you go out and coach, and we'll see you next week here on the podcast. Have a great week, everyone.